Begin log. My name is Cedric Marsh. I remember when I used to look outside my window, see the sprawling gray wall of the apartment adjacent mine. It seemed alien to see that wall come down and from my slice of heaven, see the skyline of what's left of the city across the river. It's surreal that I could walk into the room that once belonged to my neighbor, and anyone else's for that matter. Only now did I finally uncover the reason that I could hear tapping against the wall. It really was because her bed frame skittered against the hardwood floor and tapped against our shared tan flat walls. I don't remember if she'd been one of the first few that was allowed to evacuate, but I do remember that incessant tapping on the weekends I had been so accustomed to for half a decade now had finally stopped at one point. Sleeping had been difficult when it was gone. I never thought I would say that. Walking through empty halls and down empty stairs, I swore I heard the laughter of Kelly and Mason. It was 7 a.m. and I always saw them leaving the corner room on the first floor down the hall, but like all children, they had been evacuated first. And I'd never seen a child in these walls or in this city in 2 months. Or was it 3? Opening the heavy classical door to the open world, the cold February air bit through my coat, gripping my joints, which were stiff to move in the frigid breeze. Down Main Street, there were cars of all makes and models parked by meters, and some left in the middle of the road in all which ways. The Ford was still hiked up there, half on the street and half on the sidewalk. The hole beneath it, the jagged remnants of a fire hydrant, and the driver had plowed right through that. When I walked up to it, the displaced form of the battered hydrant still lay among the chipped cement. The hole, for which gushed water, had been a close source of fresh water, and now barely trickled anything. The surrounding pavement had been weathered down, and a small, stagnant pool that trickled towards the intersection and now into the storm drain also had a murky pool forming around it. Of course, no one had come to do maintenance on the underground in months. Walking down towards an old tea stop, it seems like today was a day I took in how quiet it truly was. Cars that for hours had been honking their horns signaling a crash were all silent. The sound of the close-by highway was also missing. The line of abandoned vehicles, the only reminder of just how bustling such a road once was. And it wasn't just the roads. The rattling of the trains was also gone. I wondered once when I was younger how it would feel to walk along the tracks. It captivated me then, and now, when I have the freedom to do what I could never have back then, it all feels so mundane. My sneakers clacked against the wood and stone beneath me, and each day I tested it to see if certain tracks were loose, or just naturally rickety, or it was the way I walked on them. All of it made a song, a tune even, of waning wood and loose metal and stone. Just little things, really, that help pass the time. Sort of like this recording. Climbing over the ticket gates and rolling under half-closed shutters, I tapped the light switch, which did nothing to illuminate the store, still cloaked in darkness. This convenience store, it didn't really face any of the windows, so the clerk didn't have to deal with the sun, so I tried a second switch. And then there was lights. A fluorescent flickering thing, but suitable for my means. Looking at the empty shelves, I saw, pens, lottery tickets, packs of gum, and what was left of assorted candies that I would have loved to have bought when I wasn't late for my commute. What hadn't been picked at by the rats that scurried in the tunnels, the squirrels and pigeons that found their way in, was, next to useless. Sandwiches that were months old, and the most untouched ones were rancid, stale bread hiding the molded and rotting filling. Further back was a door into storage which had cases of unopened product. Further back still was a mid-sized fridge which I put my hands to. Thankfully, still cold to the touch. Inside was some food which I had the dates on. When I worked in retail, I always knew you had to keep tabs on products so it wouldn't go bad before it was sold. At least 3 wraps were not beyond their expiration. A microwave sat on the small desk next to it, and a coffee maker that was cracked and stained with the remnants of its long-gone brew. The digital clock read 7:45, and with a few clicks and a test heat, I was satisfied that the machine wouldn't break and or explode on me. Following the instructions on my breakfast, I tossed the morsel in with extra time, just in case the microwave wasn't working at max capacity. Though even when the machine was being used regularly, it probably wasn't in its prime at all. As I listened to my food pop as the heat bathed it, I sat on the floor and scratched off some lottery tickets. I remember playing once, and I hadn't even bought the ticket, and as I watched as I won nothing upon sweet nothing, as the minutes counted down till I could feast, I was over 40 tickets in when I finally saw the number reveal itself. The beeping of my finished food was almost like a bell of celebration and congratulations, as I was now the lucky winner of over $500,000. It was enough to make me chuckle then, as it does now, really, and as I tossed the roll of snaking tickets aside, I retrieved my food from the machine, swamping it back and forth between my hands as it cooled. I wonder if I would have won that ticket under normal circumstances. I took this route every day, and I always bought something from here, but as those refried beans and tough rice hit my palate, I knew that I only put my money in what was assured, and that old near-expired burrito. It was no gourmet feast, but it was assured in its ability to satisfy me. First thing off my list found now was a search for my second item, a portable solar generator. With my new view, I had a marginally sustainable source of power when the generator in the basement would inevitably give out. Digging out a small map I still had, I looked down at the T-stops. I knew some of them had bigger traction, and big traction meant big business, and, well, big business meant items no other store could hope to carry in this godforsaken state. Crawling through the train tunnels, my flashlight was the only source of, ever-present light as the dripping of condensation pattered against the floor. It was only now that these vast underground highways were silenced that I really actually stop and compare them to caves. Very similar to those on the Appalachian Trail, honestly. Hundreds of snaking pathways that may lead to the surface. Some stations were caved in, and more than once I climbed through the carcass of long-abandoned train cars. And as my traveling took detours towards my destination, above me, the footsteps rattled over my head. Loose bits of concrete falling to the floor and splintering as what sounded like artillery trailed over in the opposite direction. And, well, like clockwork, I knew to turn on my Geiger counter, fasten my mask, and add potassium tablets to my list of groceries to pick up. The faint crackle began to sound, and looking down I could see 16 counts per minute. Nothing too severe, and the further I hiked, slowly the levels returned to normal, and the white noise of my lifeline thankfully died down. Finally, I came to a stop closest to my destination. Taking the stairs up towards the light, it was now noon, and the chill of winter seemed to wane under the sun. Thank God. This stop was all too familiar, even with debris that coated the ground, cars thrown about one another, some lodged in the side of high-rises, and chunks of building missing from others, missing and letting their innards be open for all the world to see. I remember I'd come down here to get lunch when my schedule allowed it. Following that instinct that seemingly had not been forgotten, I found that old restaurant, but it was nothing but a crumbled memory. The windows shattered and spread across the ground, and some of it coating the table that bordered it. Other tables had been upturned, and pictures and wall ornaments were either missing or scattered about the desolation. Even after so long, I still remember that meal. The fresh food and the smiling friends I shared it with. Detour aside, I spent what seemed like an eternity crawling through abandoned buildings, smashing open doors to find what I was seeking. Even in stores where I could have hoped there would be any, not a single gun to be found. To think that in all this time I never came across a firearm. A state, man, sometimes. Many generators I found were crushed and damaged beyond repair, only until I slunk into the depths of one of the storage rooms and rigorously read box names did I find what I sought. Opening a box still hoisted on a small forklift was a series of generators specific to my needs. Quarry found, I shoved it into my pack and set for home. Coming out the back of the store, past double doors, I was in the electronics section of the old store. Back then, I remember how I could walk up and down these halls searching for what I did not have, and in the grand scheme of it all, did not really need, but all the same, those things which wasted time brought me joy and helped shield my eyes from seeing the world crumble around me. Looking at what remained, I saw the musty half-visible image of a game yet to be made, but soon to come out. Others showed release dates already passed, but all the same, nothing really left but empty dreams. With some food taken as rations, my scavenging was complete and I moved back towards my tunnels. Again, my encounter began to buzz, and with it came those footfalls, 60 counts per minute and rising fast. Moving quickly, I jumped down behind the disheveled steps and down them, and as I moved to make distance between me and the zone of death that walked on two legs above ground, 80 counts per minute now, and as I ran, the cackle shifted between the deep rumble of 85 and dropping to a more serviceable 70. Taking out the bottle of pills, I squeezed a handful past my gas mask and pressed on. But before I could make much headway, I saw the ceiling above me give way. Running towards the sedation, I heard the ceiling continue to collapse behind me. The sound of stone crashing into metal was joined by the sound of a living foghorn. Running out of my foxhole, gusts of dust and bits of building pelted me, and through my mask I watched as the building I had come out of was decimated. From behind the high-rise to my right thrust a reptilian thing upon two-toed muscular legs. Small arms with two-fingered hands kept close to the body, the stomach a light brown, and the rest of the body a dark olive green. Broad and boxy head with distinct exposed teeth, and horns resting above burning orange eyes like a devilish crown, and a long armored tail slithered behind it. I think the Giga Tyrant is what they called it. Giga Tyrannus Rex in full. The first kaiju of the modern age. And from the rubble of the shopping center rose a giant insectoid, four grasping limbs with scythe-like ends, and it gave a low thrum as they grinded against one another, like a sword against grindstone. It was a sleek black and it gleamed against the light, and on its head were large, compound crimson eyes. The thorax was jagged, and the exoskeleton gave way to a bulbous abdomen. It was almost like an ant, mantis, and spider melded into several meters of abject horror. I think they were called arachnids or something. This one it looks like to be a soldier of some kind. And rising to its full height, I saw that despite its massive size compared to me, the saurian still stood taller. The insect's mouth unfurled in a mass of mandibles as it chittered a challenge with claws outstretched. The reptile charged forward, snapping its jaws just shy of its prey. The arachnid ducked out of the way and dug its bladed arms into the Rex's flank. Scuttling up to the G-Rex's stegosaur-like backplates, it thrashed about in an attempt to buck off the pest. One thing I had learned when it came to running from something that can bulldoze through a building, it's to never lose eye contact with that thing. Crowds made these issues harder, being at the whim of who's ahead and who's behind you. With only cars and fallen objects in my way, sprinting past buildings so I could keep my eyes focused on them was an easy affair. Catching glimpses, I saw the G-Rex thrust itself into a far-off building, which the arachnid avoided by crawling to another spot of its body. Like a cowboy riding a bronco, I guess, it's a matter of finding balance and holding out where you could. I also began to notice that the spines on the saurian had begun to glow, and that signaled the tide of the battle turning. Inevitably, I saw the arachnid caught in the G-Rex's jaws and thrown through the building I was only moments ago behind. Crashes like that are one I'd expect to be post-up missile would feel like. A loud boom, billowing smoke, bits of everything thrown in all directions, and you too also thrown with a blast. I tucked into a ball and I felt myself taken by the wind. My backpack containing my prize skidded against the ground, which was both a blessing for my body and my neck for that matter, but also a curse. Risking my life for damaged goods in the place I found it in, now rife with radiation. Well, it would have been the bad luck to offset my lottery win, I guess. That counter on my back was now reading a rough 90, then the buzzing grew faster and hit a solid 100 counts per second. Getting up and continuing to run, I periodically turned back to see the arachnid rising from the hole it had made, a sickly lime-green flood of blood dripping from its two missing left arms, and as it stood in a split second, it was flung backwards by a ray of orange energy. The signals on my counter continued to rise, and the long shadow was cast by the deadly light behind me. And in an instant, the light was gone. I turned to see the already destroyed building with bits of molten slag dripping to the ground. Pieces that still clung to the structure were glowing like they had come out of a forge's fire. And smoke drifted up from where the arachnid had been launched into, and a wafting odor of singed flesh and the soul-shaking roar signaled the victor of that battle. By now, the time was 5, and dusk had begun to roll in. If there's one thing above all others I'd learned, it was not to be caught outside at night. With my original escape route now buried under several pounds of rubble, I was now moving through the streets, my Geiger counter still clicking, which thankfully had begun to slow the closer I was to home. Several times I looked for stations that could get me back home, but none of them would get me quicker than just moving in a straight line, honestly. But even in empty cities, a monster, or 5, or 6, or more, could be behind any corner, even with the thunder of footfalls and the roars like cracks of lightning. Now more than ever, I saw all the places I had once set foot in. Restaurants, function halls, museums, apartments, and the like. Flashes of memories and sounds just a little off. Had I not been exposed to so much radiation in a short time, I would assume it was an act of God. Seeing those moments, those better times, and imagining what could have been. When I finally made it back to my apartment, I threw everything, including myself, in a shower. For what it's worth, a long shower and clothes is a little less radioactive material on me and in my system. Some black tea with a course of seaweed, kelp, onion, dazzled over an instant burrito heated while I washed off. All things that we were told would help keep our radiation level low, now combined with train station food. Wonderful. Checking my bag to see that my prize was really scratched, along with myself, slightly dented, thankfully not myself, but very much still working. I plugged it in. I breathed a sigh of relief as I shoved food and drink into me, and I turned on my radio, which I had attached to it, to see if any and all stations were out there. From news to the sports ones and even the old emergency line, the dust and echoes of static was all I heard. If that didn't work, the TV or internet, which were long dead, were also all a bust. Maybe if things get worse, I could maybe make a trek up to Arkham if need be. Finishing up the meal and the radio a bust, I left the clothes up to dry and settled in for the night. With no trains, cars, or people, the nights were quiet, for the most part really. But when they dragged on, the sounds of the new world were afoot. A spattering of sounds we used to think only stalked our nightmares. But it's just part of the routine now, the new normal. But Sometimes in those later hours of the night, I could still hear that bed frame tapping against my wall. End log.